Let me ask you something. What would you do if the very child you raised, the one you fed, clothed, stayed up all night for when he had a fever, suddenly decided one day that you were no longer welcome in his life? No warning, no explanation, no apology. Just blocked. One click. And just like that, years of love, sacrifice, and motherhood were deleted like an unwanted file. I know you're watching this because something in the title struck you. Maybe you've been cut off. Maybe you've been disrespected. Maybe you're simply tired of feeling like your love doesn't matter anymore. And maybe, just maybe, you're here for a little bit of justice. Stick with me because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why I did what I did, how far a mother can go when she's pushed to her breaking point, and why no one should underestimate a woman who's been cast aside. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Because this isn't just a story about money. This is a story about self-worth, silence, and what happens when a mother reclaims her voice. Now, before I go any further, let me talk to you. Yes, you right there. Watching this. I want you to stay with me. Not because I need the views, not because I'm here for drama, but because if you've ever poured everything into someone only to be left behind, this story is yours too. This is for every parent who's been made to feel invisible by the very people they gave everything to. This is for every single person who's ever been shut out of a life they helped build. You're not alone, and I'm going to tell you what really happens when the tables turn. You came here for a reason. Maybe you're curious, maybe you're judging me already, or maybe you're hurting. Either way, I promise you this, you won't leave empty-handed. Because in the next few minutes, I'm going to peel back the layers, show you what led to the ultimate betrayal and the move I made that changed everything. It didn't happen all at once. These things never do. It was like a slow leak in a house, quiet, hidden, but deadly. My son, Brandon, used to be my shadow. Every mother says that, I know, but with him it was different. When his father left us when Brandon was just 7, it was me and him against the world. I used to pack his lunch with handwritten notes, wait in the car for hours at soccer practice, and worked 2 jobs just so he could have the latest phone, the best school trip, the things his friends had. And for a while, it felt worth it. He would hug me in public. He'd call me his hero. I remember once, when he was 10, he made me a Mother's Day card from scrap paper and colored pencil, and it said, asterisk, one day I'll make you proud enough to rest. Asterisk, I kept that card for years, until he blocked me on every app like I was a stranger asking for money. And you might be wondering why? What happened? Was there a fight? Did I cross a line? But that's the thing, I didn't see it coming. There were little signs, sure. He'd started dating a girl from college who didn't like old people energy. He moved into a downtown apartment I'd helped him pay the deposit on, and suddenly, I was too overbearing. I'd send texts, just checking in, and he'd leave me on read. Then came the silence. Then came the blocks. Instagram, Facebook, even Venmo. I didn't even know you could block someone on Venmo. I was cut off. Digitally erased. I only found out he'd gotten a new job through a LinkedIn post that someone else tagged him in. And what's worse? He posted pictures with her family. Her mom. Her dad. Smiling. Caption. Asterisk, home. Asterisk. Now I know some of you are feeling that twist in your chest right now. That burning, breathless ache that only comes from rejection by your own flesh and blood. Let's not pretend. It's different when it's your child. It hits deeper. It's not just about being ignored. It's about being erased from the narrative of their life. That's what Brandon did. He didn't just block me, he deleted the part of him that came from me. And when I saw those photos, her hand in his, their smiles wide and easy, I realized something brutal. He'd found a replacement. Not just for love, but for me. But what he didn't realize, what so many kids today forget, is that a mother doesn't forget. We remember everything, the sacrifices, the birthdays, the nights spent crying into a pillow so they wouldn't hear. And sometimes, when we're pushed too far, when we've been made to feel worthless, we remember what we control too. That's when I open the safe. And this is where things get interesting. Because, you see, Brandon had forgotten something. He was so busy climbing the ladder, showing off his girlfriend, bragging about his new life, that he forgot who gave him his start. The private school tuition?
Me.
The down payment on his car?
Me.
The college fund? Me. But most importantly, the trust. The inheritance. The nest egg his grandfather left behind, that I've quietly protected for years, untouched, meant to go to Brandon when he turned 30. And guess what? He turns 30 in less than 6 months. So I made a decision. Some would call it petty. Some would say it's revenge. But if you ask me, it's justice. It's reclaiming the power I gave away so freely for so many years. I changed the terms. Legally. Quietly. And when he finds out what I did, it won't be through a lawyer. It'll be through this video. Right here. Because I know he still watches. Even blocked, I know my words still find him. And if not, well, you'll know. And I'll finally say all the things I was never allowed to say. But don't think this story is just about a bank account or a broken heart. This is about boundaries. About respect. About what happens when silence is mistaken for weakness. I'm going to walk you through every step. How I built the trust, how I rewrote the will, and how I made peace with losing a son who no longer saw me as his mother. Because sometimes, the only way to heal is to sever what's killing you slowly. And if you're still watching, I know you're hooked. You want to know what pushed me to the edge. You want to hear the confrontation, the fallout, the aftermath, and I promise, it's coming. But first, I need to take you back to one moment. One dinner. One phrase that changed everything and broke the last thread holding us together. Because that was the night I stopped being Brandon's mother and started being the woman he should have never underestimated. So buckle up. Because what he said over that final meal, it wasn't just insulting. It was unforgivable. And what I did after, let's just say, he never saw it coming. He arrived 40 minutes late. No apology. Just a shrug, a distracted smile, and her, Tessa, the girlfriend. She didn't offer to take off her boots when she walked in. Tracked dirt right into the hallway. She kissed him before even saying hello to me. I tried to be gracious. I tried to ignore the condescension in her tone, the way she corrected him in front of me, like she was grooming him into someone else, someone shinier, someone less me. The small talk was excruciating. Every question I asked was met with a vague answer, a glance at her, a topic change. And then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, it slipped out. She said it with a smirk, like a joke, not meant to be funny. She still uses Facebook to comment on your old photos? That's adorable. It's like a digital scrapbook for emotionally needy moms. I felt my stomach drop. Not because of the insult, I've heard worse from strangers, but because of what he did next. He laughed. Not a polite, uncomfortable chuckle, but a full, head tilted back laugh. That's when I saw it. The line had been crossed long ago. I was the one still pretending it was there. I put down my fork, excused myself to the kitchen, and stood at the sink trying to breathe. That was the moment everything inside me started to shift. You think you'll recognize the second your heart breaks for good, but you don't. It's subtle. It's quiet. Like a light going out in the next room. You just feel the chill afterward. I don't remember the rest of the evening clearly. I went into autopilot, served the tart, smiled, nodded. He kissed me on the cheek like I was a distant aunt at a wedding. They left by 10. I locked the door behind them and turned off all the lights, except one. The one above the safe. In the days that followed, something inside me hardened. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I had spent years building a life for him, a foundation of comfort, of financial security, of love. I helped him clean up his college messes without a second thought. I paid off a credit card bill he was too ashamed to tell anyone about. I lent him $5,000 for his startup idea, which conveniently fizzled out after 3 months. And through it all, I stayed silent. Because that's what mothers do. We absorb. We give. We endure. Until one day, we don't. I began reviewing the trust documents that week. I called the lawyer, Paul Jensen, an old friend of my late father's who still handles estate cases in town. I told him I wanted to discuss the terms of Brandon's inheritance. At first, Paul hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" he asked, in that cautious way older men do when they think you're acting out of emotion. But when I explained, in detail, what had happened, not just the blocking but the manipulation, the growing contempt. His tone changed. He's made his choices, Paul said. You have every right to make yours. I still wasn't sure what I was doing then. I didn't want to act out of vengeance. I just needed to feel like I wasn't powerless anymore. But the more I dug into Brandon's recent life, the more I realized just how little I knew about the man he'd become. His social media, what I could still see through alternate accounts, was full of polished, curated images. Trips to Miami, rooftop bars, wine tastings, influencer-style posts with vague captions like asterisk, chasing dreams with the real ones. Asterisk always tagged with Tessa. And always, without fail, no mention of me. Not one holiday post. Not one birthday shout-out. It was as if I never existed. Then came something I wasn't prepared for. A message. From a woman named Lillian. Someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade. She used to be Brandon's babysitter when he was little. She messaged me through a community group and said she wasn't sure if I knew what Brandon had been saying online lately. That caught my attention. She sent screenshots, forum threads, anonymous comments, but undeniably tied to him. A thread about toxic parents, detailing someone's smothering, manipulative mother who used guilt as a weapon. The details were eerily specific. It wasn't just a vent, it was character assassination. And judging by the replies, he'd been painting me this way to more people than I realized. That's when something inside me truly snapped. But even then, I couldn't stop the questions.
Why?
Why would he lie like that? Was it Tessa? Was it shame? Had I done something I wasn't even aware of? That's when I started replaying every conversation, every moment, every sharp comment that I brushed aside for the sake of peace. I even considered reaching out to his father, a man I hadn't spoken to in over 20 years, but I wondered if Brandon's coldness came from him. It felt like a rabbit hole with no bottom. The more I searched, the more everything felt like a performance, like Brandon had been living two lives, one curated for the world, and one that left me out completely. I even questioned Paul, the lawyer. Had he spoken to Brandon recently? Had there been any inquiries into the trust? He said no, but the way he paused before answering gave me pause. He was loyal to my family, yes, but he was also old. Forgetful, maybe. Or was he being cautious? Was Brandon already planning something with Tessa, trying to manipulate the estate behind my back? The paranoia crept in. Suddenly, every person in Brandon's orbit felt like a potential suspect. Every smile felt like a cover. I began to wonder if I had underestimated how deep this disconnection really went. And then one afternoon as I was clearing out the garage, I found the card. The old, folded, almost crumbling card he made me when he was 10. Asterisk, one day I'll make you proud enough to rest. Asterisk, I held it in my hands for a long time, wondering if he meant it, wondering if something changed him, or if I'd simply never seen the truth before. It didn't feel like love gone sour anymore. It felt like something was being hidden from me. Something bigger than just a broken relationship. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about blocking me online. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about control. About rewriting the story of who he was and who I was to him. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one being erased. But who else was involved? And what were they planning next? I didn't have the answers then, but I was about to get them. Because 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from someone I never expected to hear from again. And what she told me changed everything. Forever. He's not who you think he is. I sat down. She explained that she'd seen one of Brandon's recent Instagram reels, one where he was boasting about his new startup, flashing a luxury watch and claiming he'd built everything from the ground up. She said it didn't sit right with her. She knew the version of him before the curated filters, before the brand deals and the borrowed lifestyle. According to her, Brandon had a reputation back then, a manipulator, a charmer, someone who knew how to climb but didn't care who he stepped on to get there. She didn't go into too much detail, but she hinted at a few questionable things. Financial things. Things that might involve the trust. I pressed her for specifics, but that's when she pulled back. Said she couldn't talk over the phone. Said she'd already said too much. And then she hung up. I tried calling her back. No answer. I searched her name online, found a profile that matched, and sent her a message. Nothing. I checked again the next day. Her profile was gone. Deleted. Or maybe just hidden. Either way, the door had slammed shut. But now I couldn't let it go. My heart raced with the possibility that I wasn't just dealing with a selfish son, but something darker. Something calculated. Was Brandon lying about his success? Was he using the inheritance to fund some illusion he couldn't maintain? I went straight to the safe and double-checked the documents. Everything seemed intact. But a nagging thought started to creep in. How secure was this really? If he had access to certain passwords, or if he knew more than I thought, could he have already made moves behind my back? That's when I called Paul again. I told him about the phone call, asked him if there had been any unusual activity or requests from Brandon regarding the trust. He sounded more rattled this time, evasive in a way that made my stomach twist. I can't disclose that, he said. Not without triggering certain legal steps. You understand, don't you? But no, I didn't understand. Not at all. Paul had always been like an uncle to me. Someone I trusted implicitly. Now he sounded different. Guarded. And that only made me more suspicious. I asked him point blank if Brandon had contacted him recently. He paused for a long second too long. Then said, I think we should discuss this in person. That was the last time we spoke. The next morning, I drove to Paul's office. He wasn't there. The secretary looked confused, said he hadn't shown up for work and hadn't called in. I asked if she could check his calendar. She hesitated, then admitted he had scheduled a meeting under my name for the following week, but nothing for that day. As I was walking out, I noticed something strange. The receptionist's screen flashed briefly as she minimized a window, and I swear I saw Brandon's name at the top of an email thread. But when I asked, she smiled politely and said it must have been an unrelated case. At that point, I knew something was wrong. I went home feeling uneasy, like the ground was shifting under me. I opened the safe again just to check. This time, something was missing. One envelope. A sealed document I had kept in a smaller file labeled Contingency Clause. It wasn't the main trust, but it outlined an amendment I'd considered years ago, one that limited Brandon's access to the funds based on certain conditions. It wasn't legally filed, but it had been drafted and signed by me and witnessed by Paul.
Gone.
I searched the entire safe, every drawer, every folder. I even tore apart the house. It was nowhere. That night, someone knocked on my door. It was past 9. I hesitated before opening it. It was dark out, and the porch light had been flickering for weeks. When I finally cracked the door open, I didn't recognize the man. Mid-40s, sharp jaw, expensive-looking jacket. He said his name was Mitchell. Said he was a business associate of Brandon's. Said he just wanted to touch base with me about some upcoming investments Brandon was working on. I stared at him, confused. He smiled too easily, like he was trying to disarm me. I told him it wasn't a good time. He nodded, pulled out a business card, and said, If you decide to back off, just give me a call. No hard feelings. This doesn't have to get complicated. I never closed a door so fast in my life. The next day, my laptop froze. Then restarted.
Twice.
My email account logged me out. My phone began glitching, random pop-ups appearing, calls dropping. I had this creeping, inescapable feeling that I was being watched. Or worse, monitored. When I called my friend Carol, who knows a bit about tech, she asked me if I'd recently downloaded anything. I hadn't. She told me to check for spyware. The word alone made my skin crawl. I had nothing to hide, unless you count a grieving mother finally realizing she's being played. But that's when the real twist hit me. While digging through my old files, I came across a photograph I hadn't seen in years. It was from Brandon's graduation party. In the corner of the photo, just barely visible, was Tessa. Not as Brandon's date. Not even near him. She was standing alone, by the buffet table, dressed like a caterer.
I zoomed in 3 times.
It was her. Tessa had been in our lives long before Brandon ever introduced her. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew shattered. I needed another set of eyes, someone outside the situation who could look at this without emotion clouding the judgment. So I called my sister, Diane. We hadn't spoken much lately, not out of any animosity, but just the usual drift that happens when life gets loud and heavy. I asked her to come over, told her I had something important to show her. She arrived within the hour, already anxious for my tone. I handed her the photo without saying a word, watching her face as she scanned it. She squinted, leaned in, then looked up at me. Is that? I nodded before she could finish. Her face shifted instantly. Alarm, recognition, then something else, hesitation. That's when she told me she thought she'd seen Tessa before too, just not in any place she could explain. Not in real life. But in a photo Brandon had sent her nearly 2 years ago, one of him with a group of startup mentors at some beachside seminar in California. Diane didn't know who any of them were at the time, but now she was sure.
Tessa was there too.
Not in the group, but again in the background. Alone. Watching. It should have stopped there. But it didn't. 2 days later, Diane called me in a panic. Someone had left a note on her windshield. Folded paper, no envelope, no handwriting. Just typed words, printed on cheap office stock. It read, *, family loyalty is fragile. Don't shatter it. *, nothing else. No name. No context. But she knew it was connected. She hadn't told anyone about the photo. Only me. That's when fear really started to wrap its fingers around both of us. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. Someone was trying to intimidate us into silence. That night, I went back into the safe one more time. Not to look for missing documents, but to check something I hadn't thought about in years, an old box my father had kept. It contained ledgers, legal records, and receipts tied to the estate. Things I never threw away because I wasn't sure which ones were still important. Deep inside, under a stack of faded bank statements, I found something that hadn't crossed my mind in decades. A sealed envelope addressed to Catherine, in case of legal trouble. It was in my father's handwriting, and the seal was still unbroken. I opened it with trembling hands, unsure if I was about to find the answer or spiral into more questions. Inside were several pages, mostly typewritten, detailing a quiet legal battle he'd once fought to keep the estate safe from a predatory investor named Malcolm Crane. The name sounded familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. Later, I did a reverse lookup of Tessa's background using an online tool Diane's husband recommended. It wasn't much, no social media under her real name, no LinkedIn, no digital trail that made any sense. But the address she had listed on an old university alumni directory led to a different surprise. The landlord who owned the property? Malcolm Crane. Suddenly the pieces started connecting, but not clearly enough to draw conclusions. It still didn't explain her connection to Brandon. It didn't explain the timing, the photo, or why she was slowly pushing me out of his life with surgical precision. Was she tied to this investor from the past? Was she sent to get close to my son? Or was this just my paranoia trying to give shape to shadows? And just when I thought the picture couldn't get murkier, it did. Diane called again, this time with news I wasn't prepared for. She'd gone back through her old emails, trying to see if she could find the photo Brandon had sent of that beachside event. What she found instead was an email from Brandon that had come in 3 months ago. She had dismissed it at the time because it seemed like a newsletter from one of his startup ventures, an update to family and friends, asking for support in a new financial app he was developing. But buried in the email footer was a link, one that led to a hidden investor page. Diane clicked it. It redirected to a password-protected dashboard, connected to Wi-Fi.
There was only one video file.
I clicked play. The image was grainy, low quality, like a hidden camera recording. It showed a room I didn't recognize. Brandon was there. So was Tessa. And they weren't alone. Sitting across from them was Paul. But the preview metadata was visible. It read, * Phase 2. Asset leverage via trust realignment strategy. *. I sat down hard when she read those words to me. I didn't know what was more disturbing, the idea that Brandon was building a business around my estate or the chilling language that suggested he had already found a way to leverage the trust. But none of that could be verified without access. And Paul, the lawyer, still wasn't returning my calls. His office remained strangely quiet. I considered reporting something to the authorities, but what would I say? I think my son is planning something involving my inheritance, and I've been sent anonymous threats? I didn't have hard proof, just a gnawing feeling that everything I thought I knew was starting to rot from the inside out. That night, I barely slept. I kept looking at the photograph of Tessa in the background, at her eyes. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't working. She was watching, almost like she was waiting. But for what? And the next morning, as if the universe wanted to add one more crack to my already splintering reality, I got a package in the mail. No return address. No sender. Just a plain manila envelope. Inside it was a single flash drive. No label, no instructions. I plugged it into my old laptop, the one that's never been. And just before the video cut out, I heard Brandon's voice say, "She'll never see this coming." Would you like me to continue with what happens after the flash drive reveals this betrayal, deepening the conspiracy, uncovering shocking motives, and pushing the main character toward a dramatic confrontation? I don't know how long I sat there after watching that video. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. It felt like time itself bent around me, folding in on the weight of what I had just seen. My son, the same child I once rocked to sleep during thunderous nights, the same boy whose nightmares I used to chase away with lullabies, was sitting calmly in a room with his girlfriend and my lifelong attorney, conspiring. The tone of his voice, the ease with which he spoke about me, was more than betrayal. It was cold strategy. Not frustration, not emotional distance, but calculated removal. The words echoed in my head long after the screen went black. Asterisk, she'll never see this coming. Asterisk, they weren't just words. They were a warning dressed as a boast. And suddenly I realized this wasn't just about control of the trust. This was about erasing me entirely. The air in the house felt different after that. Heavy. Still. Too quiet in all the wrong ways. I began to question everything around me. Every flickering light, every creak in the floorboards, every car that drove too slowly past my front window. The next day, I took the flash drive and stashed it in a secure lockbox in my bedroom closet, then transferred a backup copy onto an encrypted USB I planned to give Diane. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was one step ahead. But paranoia has a way of making you second-guess even the most basic instincts, and within 24 hours, I was no longer sure who I could trust. That night, something changed. I was coming back from the grocery store. Nothing unusual, just a quick run for eggs and milk. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the porch light was off. That might sound minor, but I always leave it on after dark. Always. I sat in the car for a moment, keys still in the ignition, just staring at the door. That's when I saw it, a faint reflection in the side window. A silhouette. Just far enough back to be out of reach from the light, but close enough that I knew someone was watching. I turned my head quickly, heart thudding against my ribs, but the figure was gone. I rushed to the front door, fumbling with the keys, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped them. When I got inside, nothing looked disturbed. Not obviously, at least. But something was off. You know when you walk into a room and you can feel that someone's been there? That eerie stillness that hangs in the air like a warning? I locked every door, checked every window. Everything was technically secure. But my gut told a different story. The next morning, I called Diane to come over. No answer. I figured she was busy, so I left a message and tried again in the afternoon. Still no reply. That wasn't like her. She always answered, if not immediately, then within the hour. I started to panic. I drove to her house, heart racing with every red light. Her car was in the driveway, but the front door was ajar. Not wide open, just cracked, enough to trigger the kind of fear that settles deep in your chest and doesn't let go. I stepped inside slowly, calling her name, my voice shaking. The living room was quiet. Too quiet. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, buzzing with missed calls, including mine. But she was gone. I called the police. They took the report, searched the property, asked the usual questions. No signs of forced entry, no indication of struggle. It was like she had just stepped out in the middle of doing something and vanished. I tried to explain everything to them, the notes, the threats, the video. They nodded politely, took my statement, but I could see it in their eyes.
They didn't believe me.
Not really. To them, I was just another middle-aged woman spiraling over a strained relationship with her adult son. No proof of a crime. No blood. No reason to raise alarms. But I knew. I could feel it in every nerve ending. Something was wrong. I didn't go home after that. I couldn't. I booked a room at a motel just outside of town, one of those no-frills places with stale coffee and curtains that never quite close all the way. I brought only the essentials: clothes, laptop, the flash drive, and a list of names I'd started compiling. Every person Brandon had worked with, every investor tied to his startup, every connection to Tessa, every forgotten thread that might explain what was happening. The deeper I dug, the more questions surfaced. And one name kept appearing in odd places. Evelyn Grant. I didn't know her. Never met her. But she showed up as a silent partner in two companies Brandon was loosely tied to. No online profile, no interviews, no images. Just a name.
Quiet. Hidden.
Purposeful. I printed everything, mapped it out on motel stationery, like a conspiracy theorist in a late-night documentary. I felt ridiculous. But I also felt more awake than I had in weeks. The danger was real now. Not just emotional, but physical. Diane was gone. I was being watched. The trust had been tampered with. And at the center of it all was Brandon, my son. The boy I raised. The man I no longer recognized. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my room. Not rushed. Not panicked. Just slow and deliberate. I turned off the lamp and stood against the wall near the window, peering through the crack in the curtain. A man stood just beyond the parking lot light, partially obscured by a vending machine. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. He was just waiting. I stayed frozen until sunrise. When I finally stepped outside, there was no sign of him. But someone had slipped something under my door. A single sheet of paper. It said, "Asterisk, you're asking too many questions. Go home, Catherine. While you still can, asterisk." I didn't go home. I couldn't, because somewhere out there, someone had made a decision. And I wasn't sure if I was the next to vanish, or if I had just run out of time. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him what I knew about Brandon, the trust, the threats, the missing document, Diane's disappearance, and the strange man who'd stood outside my motel room in the dead of night. He was quiet at first. Then he said something that stopped me cold. "Catherine, you need to stop chasing Evelyn Grant. She's not who you think she is." I asked him what he meant, heart pounding, the silence between his words stretching so long, I thought the call had dropped. And then, with a voice lower than before, he said, "Because I knew her. Years ago. Before you and I were married." I didn't know what to say. Daniel had never been one for secrets, or so I'd believed. He explained that Evelyn Grant had once been his boss, back when he worked for a private equity firm in New York in the early 90s. She was brilliant, he said. Ruthless. A woman who didn't just play the game. She designed the board. She vanished one day without a trace, after an internal scandal that never went public. Rumors of embezzlement, insider trading, blackmail. But no proof. The firm covered it up to protect its reputation, and Daniel never saw her again. Or at least he thought he hadn't. Until now. He said the moment I mentioned her name, something clicked. He'd seen a photo Brandon had posted last year of a mentor who was helping fund a startup. The woman's name wasn't listed in the caption, and she had been partially turned away from the camera. But Daniel had recognized the posture, the energy, the sharpness in her expression. "It was her, Catherine," he said. "Evelyn Grant didn't just come back. She found a way in through Brandon." I sat there, stunned, barely breathing. Everything I thought I knew started to unravel at the seams. What if Tessa hadn't been the mastermind? What if she wasn't pulling the strings, but being used herself, just like Brandon? What if the real threat had been hiding in plain sight, buried under layers of fake names and corporate shells, slowly steering my son into something far more dangerous than greed? And then the worst thought hit me. What if Brandon wasn't the villain? What if he was the victim? It explained the contradictions, the strange duality of who he'd become. The rehearsed social media life versus the coldness in person. The sudden wealth. The secrecy. The calculated removal of me from his world. It all pointed to influence, not initiative. Someone had been guiding him, reshaping him, isolating him from the people who might see through it. And maybe, just maybe, he'd reached out to Paul, the lawyer, because he knew something was wrong. Maybe he'd gone to him for help. But Paul, like everyone else, had already been compromised. I went back through every file I had, scanning for missed connections, buried leads, overlooked links. That's when I noticed something that I had skipped over before. A scanned business card from one of Brandon's first investors, an LLC based out of Nevada. I had printed it weeks ago, but never followed up because it looked like a dead end. Now I looked closer. The business name wasn't listed under any state database. But the email domain attached to the card had a traceable registration, one that was routed through a web server linked to a holding company. And guess who sat on the board of that holding company? Evelyn Grant. Or rather, a woman going by the name Lila Everett, one of many aliases now appearing across Brandon's investment portfolio like breadcrumbs in reverse. That night, I sat in my motel room, lit only by the blue glow of my laptop screen, unable to shake the idea that this had all been part of a larger plan, one that started long before Brandon had any idea what he was stepping into. I remembered how hard he'd struggled after college, how quickly things turned around once he met Tessa, how he'd started speaking in phrases that didn't sound like him, phrases about value creation, asset repositioning, and trust realignment strategy. Words too polished, too artificial. I had thought he was becoming arrogant, but maybe he was being groomed. Then the phone rang. No caller ID. I shouldn't have answered it, but I did. The voice on the other end wasn't threatening. It wasn't even angry. It was familiar. It was Paul.
But his voice was weak, scared, shaky.
I didn't know what I was signing, Catherine, he whispered. I thought it was just restructuring language. Brandon said it was temporary, that it was to protect the assets. But then she showed up. And now backslash. I think I've made a mistake. I asked him where he was. The line went dead. And just like that, the man who had safeguarded my family's future for decades disappeared into silence. And I was left with one terrifying realization. This was never about inheritance. It was about possession. I left just after sundown, heart pounding so hard it blurred my vision. I had memorized the address Brandon had listed on one of his business registrations, a sleek apartment complex downtown, where the rent cost more than what I'd spent on my first house. It was the kind of place that came with concierge service and valet parking, with white stone counters and soundproof glass that made you feel like the world couldn't touch you. But it could. And tonight I was going to prove that. I stood outside the building for a long moment, trying to calm my breathing. I had the flash drive tucked in my pocket, the final piece I needed. New footage from a whistleblower who had emailed me anonymously 2 nights earlier. It showed Evelyn and Paul in a locked boardroom signing forged documents. Documents that amended Brandon's inheritance to flow into a shell company Evelyn controlled. And the timestamp on the video? 3 months before Brandon's startup even launched. It meant this wasn't his plan. It had never been his plan. When the concierge asked who I was visiting, I didn't hesitate. My son, Brandon Pierce. The man nodded, made a quick call upstairs, then waved me through with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. I took the elevator up to the 23rd floor, fingers twitching the whole ride. When the doors opened, Brandon was waiting. Not surprised. Not angry. Just tired. He didn't say anything at first. Just stepped aside and let me in. The apartment looked like a showroom. Cold. Perfect. Empty of warmth. Tessa stood by the kitchen island, arms crossed, expression unreadable. And next to her, leaning against the marble countertop, glass of red wine in hand, was Evelyn. Her face was sharper than I remembered from the old firm photos I'd found. More polished, more calculating. She smiled as if she'd been expecting me her whole life. You've gone through an awful lot of trouble, Catherine, she said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. For what? A few family heirlooms and a bank account. I took a step forward. You stole my son. You took his trust. his voice, his name. And you wrapped it up in a business plan like it was a brand launch. She laughed softly.
No, dear.
Brandon gave it to me. Brandon looked away, jaw clenched. I turned to him, desperate to see the boy I remembered, the boy with scraped knees and big dreams. Did you? I asked. Did you know what she was doing? What she was taking from you? His eyes finally met mine, and for the first time in months, I saw doubt flicker behind them. And something else, fear. I thought it was just restructuring, he said, voice quiet. She told me it was to protect the company. To protect us. There's no us, I snapped, eyes locked on Evelyn. There's only her, and a long trail of people she's gutted to keep herself rich and invisible. That's when I pulled out the flash drive and set it on the counter. Go ahead, I said to Brandon. Play it. It's not just you she's using. Paul's in it too. The lawyer you trusted. The one I trusted. They forged documents, Brandon. They redirected your trust fund. Your future. And when I got close to the truth, Diane disappeared. Evelyn didn't flinch. She's fine, she said. She just needed a little reminder to stay out of things she doesn't understand. My stomach turned. So, you did threaten her. She swirled her wine, smirking. I don't threaten, Catherine. I strategize. And I win. Brandon's hands shook as he plugged in the flash drive. The footage played in silence, the room frozen around it. We watched together, Paul's nervous pacing, Evelyn's crisp voice giving instructions, the signatures scrawled onto documents bearing Brandon's name. The final clip showed Evelyn walking away with a portfolio under her arm, smirking at the camera before she shut the boardroom door. When it ended, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the refrigerator. Brandon looked shattered. You lied to me, he said, staring at Evelyn like he didn't recognize her anymore. All of this. Everything. It was never real. Her voice was still calm, still calculated. It was real enough to get you out of your mother's shadow. Real enough to make you a leader instead of a follower. But if you want to throw it away for some bleeding heart reunion with Mommy Dearest, be my guest. He didn't say anything. He just stepped back. Away from her. Toward me. And that's when she pulled the second phone out of her coat pocket. This doesn't end with a family hug, she said coldly. You don't know what I've protected you from. What I've saved you from. This isn't just about a trust fund anymore. It's about people you can't cross. And Catherine, her eyes locked onto mine, you just became a liability. Brandon lunged. Not toward her, but toward the phone, slamming it onto the floor before she could hit send. The screen shattered with a crack that echoed through the marble kitchen like a gunshot. Tessa stepped forward suddenly, face white. Evelyn, she said sharply. Stop. This isn't what we agreed to. That's when I realized it. Tessa wasn't her puppet. She was her backup. And for the first time, Evelyn's calm cracked. You foolish girl, she hissed. Do you think you were anything more than bait? But Tessa reached into her own pocket and held up a second flash drive. I've been recording you since the day you brought me in. I thought you were helping him. But now, I think you just made a mistake. Evelyn's face drained of color. And for the first time, she didn't have a response. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Paul, it turned out, had already come forward, rattled by guilt and a growing fear for his life. The paperwork Evelyn had forged implicated her in federal financial crimes, and with Tessa's recordings, the case was airtight. Brandon didn't say much that night, just hugged me tightly in the elevator and whispered, I didn't know. I swear. And I believed him. But just when I thought it was all over, just when the dust was settling and I was finally breathing normally again, I received one final envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo. It was of me. Taken the night, I had watched the silhouette outside my motel room. On the back were 6 words. Asterisk next time, don't play with fire. Asterisk. Brandon went quiet for a while. And I let him. He needed space, not just from me but from the version of himself that Evelyn had helped him craft. I watched him dismantle his startup, cut ties with all the shady shell companies and silent investors that had crept into his world like vines through a cracked foundation. He sold the apartment, shut down the accounts. For a time, he moved back into the house he grew up in, quietly, humbly, sleeping in the same room where posters from his high school years still clung to the walls. We didn't talk much in those early days. But sometimes, in the morning, he'd make me coffee before I even got out of bed. No words, just a mug placed gently on my nightstand. It wasn't an apology. It was something deeper, an unspoken offering of repair. Paul eventually testified. The guilt had eaten away at him, and while I couldn't fully forgive him, I understood the fear that had driven his silence. Evelyn had built a system designed to trap people into complicity. She didn't threaten them outright. She gave them just enough rope to hang themselves, and then held the chair. Tessa disappeared from the public eye entirely after the trial. No interviews. No statements. Just a quiet retreat into anonymity. But I heard she'd enrolled in law school in Oregon under a new name. Maybe she wanted to build something better. Or maybe she just wanted to disappear before the spotlight caught up to her again. Either way, I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. As for the trust, the legal one, not the emotional kind, it was restored. But I made changes. Big ones. The inheritance would no longer be a lump sum. It would be conditional, spread over time, earned through service, not status. Brandon didn't object. In fact, he helped write the new terms. He said he never wanted that kind of money to sit on a pedestal again. He wanted it to mean something. And for the first time, I believed him. Still, the photo haunted me. The one that came in the unmarked envelope, the image of me outside that motel, captured in the shadows. It meant someone was still watching, still aware. Evelyn might have been the architect of the con, but people like her never worked alone. She had partners, backers, ghosts in the wires of offshore accounts and encrypted servers. I reported it to the authorities, of course, but the trail was cold by the time they got involved. No fingerprints. No return address. Just a reminder that even in victory, there are costs. And not all enemies wear their faces in public. I tried to get back to normal. Gardening. Volunteering. Quiet dinners with old friends who hadn't known what was happening behind the curtain of my life. I smiled more, even if some of those smiles were still stitched together with nerves. Healing is slow. Sometimes invisible. And the truth is, some part of me will always flinch at shadows. But another part, the one that kept going when everything told me to stop, is stronger than it's ever been. In the end, this wasn't just a story about betrayal or wealth or manipulation. It was about identity, about waking up to the realization that love, real, messy, painful love, isn't about control. It's about presence. Brandon had lost his way because he stopped knowing who he was without validation. I had lost mine because I forgot that silence doesn't keep the peace. It just buries the cracks until they split wide open. Sometimes, when I walk the old trails behind our house, I remember Brandon as a child. How he used to race ahead, daring the trees to keep up. I used to call after him, warning him not to run too far, too fast. Now, I just watch quietly. Let him find his own pace. Let him circle back when he's ready. And lately he does. More and more. Not because he has to, but because he wants to. Still, every so often, I check the mailbox with a little tension in my chest. Not because I expect another threat, but because part of me knows the game Evelyn played wasn't invented by her. It was inherited, recycled, whispered between boardrooms and burner phones. And someone else out there is still playing, still watching, still waiting for their moment. But now they know something too. I see them. And next time, I won't be caught off guard. Let me know if you'd like a cinematic YouTube outro version of this ending for your video, something that blends this emotional close with a final voiceover hook to boost audience retention and comments.